Across the old continents, the ruins remain, stones hewn with impossible precision, towers aligned to vanished stars, spirals carved where no tools should have reached. The pyramids of the Nile, the stone circles of Europe, the terraces of the Andes, the ancient Adam's calendar in the south, all speak of a mind that shaped the world with form beyond utility. No written records accompany them, no names are inscribed. The structures themselves are the memory, silent and unbroken. Across deserts and valleys, the stones persist, waiting for a question that has not yet been fully asked. Today we present a bold reintegration of the historical evidence, the recognition that the builders of these structures were an ancient divergence from the early hominid line, the Anunnaki. Unevolved for speech, they never developed language the way we think of it, but instead cultivated a way of being shaped by pattern, resonance, and long memory. While their cousins adapted toward the immediate needs of voice and gesture, the Anunnaki refined perception through the stability of form and the harmonics of place. Their legacy is not preserved in artifacts of daily life, but in structures tuned to the deep architecture of the world. At the root of their thought lies the first discoveries, the breath of Adam, the cycle that bound life to land, and the silence of Cain, the restraint that preserved balance through refusal. Before there were cities, there were gestures. Before there were monuments, there were patterns drawn from the currents of herds, the flight of birds, the stillness of stone. Their inheritance was not a matter of words passed from mouth to ear, but of alignment woven into the body and impressed into the earth. What separates them from us is written not only in stone, but in the structures of sound itself. In the narrow shaping of the early throat, the puzzle sharpens, not enough to produce language, but enough to control resonance. Where we filled the air with names and narratives, they filled it with vibration. Where we remembered by speaking, they remembered by tuning. Their circles, their towers, their pyramids endure because they were never meant to be spoken. They were meant to be sung. The awakening of intelligence was not the beginning of endless novelty, but of constraint, a great narrowing of the possible into the necessary. The Neanderthals, poised at the threshold of thought, could not scatter their ideas into endless words. Their bodies could gesture, their hands could shape, their eyes could point, but their throats could not weave speech. Intelligence, once sparked, was trapped within the slow choreography of gesture and the unyielding surfaces of stone. It was necessity that guided them, and necessity that revealed the profound law only a finite number of patterns could serve. Only a limited architecture of meaning could allow thought to transcend immediate experience and become transmissible. They did not invent symbols as endless decorations, they found them. The few structures in which every relationship, every tension, every harmony could be housed. Thus their glyphs were not many, but few, 22, shaped by the iron constraint of survival. These were not mere marks. They were discoveries, revelations, each one a new portal into thought, each one expanding the range of what could be said, remembered, taught. And because they could not name their discoveries in sound, they named them in life, through ritual, through reenactment, through the slow, solemn embedding of the pattern into their collective body. Each discovery became a pillar of their culture, a turning in their history, a convergence of life, meaning, and memory. When later civilizations preserved echoes of this archaic inheritance, they too named their beginnings through figures, not as inventions of men, but as revelations entrusted to human hands. In the Torah, the ancient memory of these moments lingers in the stories of those first named, each a living metaphor for the original moments when mind grasped pattern and made it flesh. Thus begins the deeper telling of the journey, not as accident but as necessity, not as invention but as remembrance. The dawn spread across the misted plain, soft and slow, like the unfurling of breath from the sleeping earth. In the half-light the herd moved, not as a scattering of beasts but as a single tide of life, folding and unfolding, shifting yet whole. Their heavy flanks and bowed heads seemed to pulse together with one breath, each animal guided not by itself alone, but by the unseen rhythm of the herd. From the rocks overlooking the plain, the hunters watched. Their bodies were still, their breath held low against the cold stone. For many among them, the herd was only what it had always been, meat to be taken, danger to be survived. But for one, the one whose memory would later be known as Adam, a different awareness stirred. He saw that the herd was not many but one. The movement of the bison, the landscape they crossed, and the breath of the hunters themselves were not separate things. They moved together, bound in a single act of balance. The strength of the herd, the opportunity in the shifting ground, and the readiness of the hunters converging in a unity that could not be divided without being destroyed. In the waiting, he began to sense that survival was not about conquering the herd, but about aligning with the forces already present. The hunters did not impose themselves on the world. They entered into it, found their place within it, and moved with it. Herd, hunter, and land, three forces, each giving existence to the others, none able to stand alone. The sign was given, a subtle hand movement, and the hunters surged forward, their bodies flowing down the rocks and onto the plain, like a second, smaller river crashing against the great tide of the herd. The bison broke, the earth thundered, and in the chaos Adam moved without thought, as if carried by the same currents he had seen. Spears found their mark. Dust and blood rose into the rising sun. Life was taken, as life must be, but it was not stolen. It was exchanged, a movement within the same vast breathing pattern that gave rise to all. As the herd disappeared into the distance, and the dead lay still, Adam knelt by the fallen creature. He pressed his hand against the coarse hide, feeling the last vibrations of warmth leaving the body. In the stillness that followed, he understood, without language, that strength was not possession, and survival was not isolation. Strength was relationship, hunter and herd, earth and breath, life and death, bound in an endless circle where each part sustained and was sustained by the others. Later, in the hollow of their stone shelter, while the smell of cooked meat rose into the cold air, and the others pressed close to the fires, Adam gathered ochre mixed with marrow fat and approached the wall. He touched the stone, feeling its cool permanence, and began to shape the first deliberate mark of memory. The figure that emerged was heavy, broad, and strong, the form of the ox or bison, not as an individual animal but as the living embodiment of the balance he had witnessed. It was not art, it was recognition. It was the memory of the pattern made visible, the herd, the hunter, the ground itself joined into one enduring breath. He made no effort to distinguish the parts. The figure was rounded, heavy, complete, not one beast but the life force that moved through all. In the days that followed, something subtle began to change. Those who passed the figure placed their hands to their chests, a silent gesture of acknowledgement. When they moved beyond the mark, they exhaled, a long, slow breath released not for exhaustion, but for belonging. It was not yet ritual in the structured sense. It was an inevitability born of shared memory, the body recalling what words could not yet speak. Over time, this silent honoring grew. Before great hunts, they would gather before the figure, each pressing hand to heart, each giving breath to the space. Gestures among them began to shift as well. When teaching the young, they pointed first to the herd, then to the earth, then to themselves, showing the connections that could not be named but could be known. It became understood, deeply and without question, that life was a triangle drawn across experience, the self, the world, and the living other, each sustaining the others in an endless circuit. Thus, the breath of Adam became the first cornerstone of their culture. Not because Adam willed it so, or because he was greater than others, but because he had witnessed the deeper structure of being and preserved it through symbol and gesture. Strength, pathway, and flow, these were not yet spoken as ideas, but they lived in the movement of bodies, the touch of hand to stone, the breath given in thanks. Their first foundation was laid not in dominance nor in accident, but in recognition, that to live is to find balance within the forces that move through all things, to join the breathing of the earth itself. And so life itself became the first law, remembered in stone and breath, carried forward not by speech, but by shared being across countless generations to come. The mist clung low to the valley, blurring the edges where herd and earth became one. On the ridge above, the hunters crouched in absolute stillness, their bodies aligned by memory deeper than thought. Cain moved with the rest, his brother close beside him, their steps tuned to the same rhythm, their breath rising and falling in silent accord. Every eye tracked the herd below, the collective gaze fixing on the slow, grazing shapes. Hunter, herd, and ground held together in a single pattern, a living current woven from instinct, repetition, and the old, unquestioned ways. Below, the herd shifted, hooves stirring the damp earth, and the familiar tension rippled through the hunters. Muscles tightened in readiness, the shared breath paused, preparing to descend. Yet something wavered within Cain's senses, a strain in the flow he could not ignore. His gaze, straying beyond the herd's slow movements, caught a different shape within the mist, the low, tense crouch of a saber-tooth hidden at the herd's flank. Still, his brother pressed forward, and the others followed, flowing with the pulse of inherited motion, blind to the new threat that the ground, the herd, and the air no longer concealed. Cain stopped, the rhythm breaking sharply within him. His body froze against the slope, and with it the seamless movement of those closest faltered. Breath held, step withheld. For the first time, divergence cracked the old pattern. Cain raised his hand, palm flat, a silent barrier born not of memory but of recognition. The others, confused by his hesitation, halted, first looking to him. Then their gaze shifted with his. From the mist, the saber-tooth's gleaming eyes revealed themselves fully. In that moment, the old natural unity, step, breath, gaze, fractured into new awareness, and a different survival instinct awoke. They watched as the saber-tooth lunged, a blur of muscle and fang, and heard his brother's cries as his blood seeped into the earth. Their eyes now turned from the saber-tooth to Cain. He watched the saber-tooth turn to its meal, satisfied its prey had been alone. As sight overtook instinct, Cain felt his hand still raised, the loss of his brother, the tribe frozen in place. Now he drew back his spear arm, and as he let fly, the hunters turned as one, their movements now shaped not by blind rhythm but by shared sight. Cain's spear found its mark, and the group's force, sharpened by shared focus, brought it down amid the crushed grasses. They stood in the settling quiet, the breath of the world seeming to pause with them. Presence had given way to absence. Movement had given way to stillness. Memory had been split from repetition. Cain knelt beside his brother, the weight of what had changed, pressing down heavier than any kill. Around him, the hunters waited in silence, knowing without knowing that their world had shifted, that survival would no longer be only the perfect imitation of the old paths. but the fragile, necessary balance between seeing anew and remembering what had been lost. Without hesitation, Cain lifted his brother's body across his shoulders. His hands and arms, stained with blood and dust, bore the full weight of what had passed. He began the slow climb back toward the shelter, the others falling in behind him without a word. Their steps were heavy with the recognition that something greater than a single life had changed, an awakening, silent and irreversible. The negations moved among them, unspoken but alive. The shared instinct had faltered, the natural balance had broken, and certainty itself had split. Yet in that fracture, there was no rage, no accusation. Cain's raised hand had not been in fear or anger, but wisdom. Survival would no longer rest only upon repetition, but on the silent weaving of many perceptions into one living thread. At the shelter, beneath the stone overhang that had witnessed the endless cycles of breath and motion, Cain laid the body down with care. The others formed no circle, offered no ritual. They stood apart and yet together, held in a stillness that acknowledged what words could not yet name. A turning had taken place. Not away from each other, but within. Cain approached the rough wall of the shelter, his hands smeared with his brother's blood and the dust of the earth. Without plan, he pressed his palm flat against the stone. Blood filled the lines of his hand, sinking into the grain. A single handprint, stark and vivid, burned itself into the rock. It was not a mark of triumph nor plea, but of recognition. What had passed from one to another, from presence into absence, and from instinct into memory. He stepped back and knelt. From the shelter floor he gathered the fine ochre dust, lifting it carefully. Bringing it to his mouth, he blew the dust softly across the wet handprint. Where blood and earth met, the hand grew sharper, more enduring, less a decoration than a memory made tangible, a preservation of what difference could teach. This was the first, but it would not be the last. In the seasons that followed, whenever one among them fell, to beast, to cold, to misstep, the survivors pressed their hands to the stone. The blood of the lost mingled with the ochre of the earth, and the breath of the living sealed the mark into the wall. Over time, the rock became a gathering of hands, not a shrine to grief, but a growing archive of warnings and lessons. Cain had shown them not merely the power of action, but the power of restraint, the power required to break a cycle, to hold back the tide when the pattern demanded reversion. The negations shaped the ritual. The living marked the absent. The blood marked the gone. The stone marked the lost. The hunters learned to read the wall. The placement of hands became a map. A fallen hunter's handprint at the mouth of a narrow pass warned of unstable ground. A cluster near a river mouth marked where waters had claimed those unready for the spring floods. The wall was no longer merely a memory of loss. It was a guide to survival. Absence teaching presence. Death teaching life. Silence teaching action. Before each hunt, they stood before the wall and repeated Cain's gesture of refusal. Hand raised, breath held, honoring the moment when one hunter had seen clearly, and by seeing clearly, had saved the tribe. And so, the silence of Cain entered into their blood and breath, as surely as the breath of Adam before it. One taught them to see life in union. The other taught them to see death in division. Together these truths formed the pillars of their emerging world. Action and inaction, affirmation and negation, breath and silence, two necessary patterns joined forever in the silent language of their walls. What we have unearthed is not simply a history of ancient hands carving stone or shaping survival. It is the deep memory of a world in which life and death, action and silence were not opposed but harmonized. each necessary to the other, each part of a single, enduring breath. The Anunnaki, the early awakeners, the silent singers of form, revealed that intelligence did not begin in conquest, but in recognition. Recognition of belonging, of balance, of the sacred necessity of restraint. Their traces remain not as broken relics, but as living questions, inscribed into the land itself. They did not leave behind declarations of triumph or treatises of dominion. They left patterns, alignments, resonances, invitations still waiting to be fully heard. The journey they began is not yet complete. It unfolds still in every moment we seek to remember what they once knew. That life is not merely the assertion of will, but the art of listening, of discerning when to move, and when to be still. Beyond the stones, beyond the breath and the silence, mysteries remain, not to be conquered, but to be entered with reverence. What they began in form and vibration calls to us still, to ask better questions, to listen more deeply, and to honor the rhythms that shaped the first awakenings of mind and soul. The pattern is not finished, it is only just beginning.